Hi everybody, it's Honest John again. Now, try as they might, the Republicans have not been able to document any significant cases of in-person voter fraud. In the last 20 years, there have been a total of 34 documented cases of people who attempted to vote when they weren't legally allowed to. And in most of those cases, they weren't trying to commit voter fraud. They thought that they could vote, they just couldn't, and they were turned away at the polls. In-person voter fraud just does not happen. And there's a good reason for that. First of all, it would be a very inefficient way to steal an election. Here in the USA, it's hard enough to get legal voters to show up. In order to use in-person voter fraud to steal an election, you would have to go out and find thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of ineligible voters. And you would have to induce them to go to the polls, I suppose with bribes of some kind. And you would have to hope that somehow doing that would not leak out. Even the CIA and the NSA can't keep their secrets. Do you really think that that would remain a secret for very long? Second of all these people would have to show up at the polls without attracting any attention. Good luck with that. So the idea that any election has ever been swayed by in-person voter fraud is just absolutely absurd. The GOP knows this. So their so-called anti-voter fraud efforts are simply an effort to disenfranchise millions of legal voters. So this type of voter suppression is actually the real voter fraud. And it's the Republicans that are doing it. If you really wanted to fight voter fraud, you have to fight the kind of voter fraud that the Republicans engage in. And this starts with the voting machines. Now, Diebold is one of the biggest companies that makes voting machines. And I have a friend that used to work there. And he told me that when he worked there, the CEOs of that company openly talked about using their machines to rig elections, to steal elections. And since then, we've had reports of Diebold voting machines that when they arrived at the polling place, they already had thousands of Republican votes in them. And this was before a single vote had even been cast. This was when they arrived at the polling places. And there have also been reports in both the 2012 and in this year's recent elections of machines that were programmed to not accept Democrat votes. When a person voted for a Democrat, after they'd finished, they would press this button and it would tell them they had voted Republican. So the first thing you have to do if you want to combat voter fraud is to ban Diebold voting machines from the polling places, find an independent company to make voting machines, monitor them, and the voting machines should be closed systems so they could not be hacked from the outside. And also, these voting machines should have a paper ballot that prints out after you've finished voting, and that would be put in the ballot box. The votes would not be stored in the machines. They would be on paper, put in the ballot box, so that before the voter put them in the ballot box, it could make sure that what was on the paper matched what they'd actually voted for. This is the only way to fight actual voter fraud, the kind of actual voter fraud that actually happens. But you don't hear the Republicans talking about that because they're the ones that do that kind of voter fraud. Thanks for listening.